Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponderon Weather. In this update, we've got a large storm coming with very heavy snow, severe weather. The polar vortex and the tropics are getting active as we'll go over my overall November thoughts. So I appreciate all my followers out there and my new followers. If you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns on North America and the tropics, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to the big picture this afternoon, and we can find ourselves what's happening over the next couple of days. This significant ridge is really going to be starting to build over the central and eastern two-thirds of the U.S., while we're going to be highlighting this significant trough that's going to be diving in out west. That's going to bring much colder conditions, a lot of heavy snow, and eventually it'll break out some severe storms by the time we get into the middle to the later half of the week. So going forward out in the tropics, things are actually starting to get active. We do have an 80% chance of development of Invest 95L down here into portions of the Caribbean. All indications are with this ridge developing over the top into the northeast of the U.S., that's going to keep helping the steering currents move this westbound, but it's also going to be a fairly slow moving system. I do feel like it's going to be named storm, tropical storm Lisa in the coming days as this continues westbound. If we can see on the overall outlook and all the models, what's happening over for the rest of the week, I think we do have our named storm of Lisa probably sometime tomorrow, but maybe into Tuesday by then. But all indications are it's going to be traversing westbound, getting it really close to Jamaica, dumping some very heavy rain into portions, a good chunk of Jamaica, into the Cayman Islands. You can see by day 4, this is a fairly slow moving systems. So what's happening is we could actually have potentially two systems that kind of come out of this old system. I do feel Lisa is going to be developing, but there's also maybe a second system that might come out of this same type of Central America gyre region beyond after Lisa forms, and that's the system that I might be a little bit more concerned about, that may be coming towards closer to the US as we get into the second week of November. So if we take a look at the overall troughing setup as we get into your Tuesday timeframe, November the 1st, to kick off November, we got that significant trough that's going to be diving in off the west coast. That's going to bring all the colder air. You can actually see the 540 line. That's an indication of that freezing line really starting to drop here. And then out ahead of it, there's the warm sector. We got plenty of warm conditions, and it's not going to feel anything but fall in a good chunk of the central and eastern two-thirds, especially further north you get. And here's the setup on the surface map. By the time we get into Tuesday, the 1,007 millibar low pressure, this would be probably Lisa by then. And most of the country is pretty dry, right? It's going to be fairly quiet for the next couple of days while all the action is going to be entering off the west. And we're going to be bringing some heavier snows. Rain's coming back in the picture for the Pacific Northwest. Rain's actually entering back in the picture in Northern California. And we got plenty of troughs trailing behind this one. So once this moves through, that's going to keep the cold air alive because we got plenty of troughs trailing behind that. So as we go into Wednesday, you can definitely see the overall jet stream really starting to dip. We've got that ridge of high pressure out here into the Atlantic here, or into the Pacific, and then we have that powerful jet really diving down into California. That just, you can see the Arctic high pressure really starts to dig, and the further it digs, that brings the colder air further south, but it also taps into some of this moisture out here in the Pacific, and that'll eventually set the stage for some severe weather by the time we get into the later half of the upcoming week. So behind that, we got plenty of snow is going to be flying behind this first trough that's going to be coming in. Good chunk of Montana, Idaho, into portions of Nevada here, into Utah with some heavier snows, getting into California, and then all the rains start to enter in California as well. Not just Northern California, but eventually it'll start sneaking into portions of Central and even Southern California, while the rest of the country is pretty dry, right, under that ridge of high pressure. But you can see by Thursday, these are low temperatures. There's an idea of that trough coming in, much colder conditions. All these areas in red here are widespread teens and even 30s and 40s showing up in California. So you're going to definitely feel this in a big way. But where the clash is and where the concern is in this warm sector. So these are low temperatures. I don't need to tell you wake up on Thursday in Minnesota, 57 degrees for a low temperature. That's a high enough for a record high minimum for this time of year. So there's plenty of warm air out ahead of it. And that's the concern for that severe threat as we get deeper into the week. So as we go into that Thursday timeframe, there's a significant trough. Pretty impressive that digs all the way into Southern California. The further it digs, it's going to tap into some of that Pacific moisture, and that's what's going to be the concern at the beginning stages of that severe threat as we head into your Thursday timeframe. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center has already highlighted that into the Texas Panhandle and portions of western Oklahoma, as well as into Kansas, setting the stage for some severe storms by Thursday timeframe, as the instability will start to be fairly significant moving back in the picture. So once that low pressure taps into this warm system, then that's when we could have that clash and have that severe storms starting to break out in this region. And I think this is just going to be the beginning stage of what could be 3 days in a row of severe storms in the middle of the country. But snow is going to be flying back behind it. So as that colder air will continue to press further into the U.S., that brings the snow line further south into Wyoming. It'll start back into the picture in the western slopes of Colorado, but eventually it'll start having some snowflakes start to fly again around the Front Range. And back into Salt Lake City, Utah is going to be picking up a couple inches from this event, and then back into Flagstaff or into Arizona. The snow line drops into the Sierra Nevadas here, drops some of the rains even along the coastal regions in San Diego. Los Angeles could be picking up some light to moderate rain as we get towards the end of the week. And then there's the temperatures by Friday as you wake up. So as the low continues to press, yeah, we're talking 43 degrees in Los Angeles. That could be enough for a record low temperature by then, and with plenty of cold air pressing, and then all that warm sector. So yeah, we get waking up to low of 61 degrees in parts of West Texas. That is plenty warm even for them for this time of year, and that's the concern as the severe storms will continue to press a little bit further east. So now the setup by Friday is going to be into West Texas and a good chunk of western Oklahoma again. Those are the areas that are most concerning for that severe threat as we get into your Friday time frame. And there's that trough really starting to dig. Pretty impressive that this jet stream digs so far south, and the further south it gets, the more juice it's going to be able to tap into the Pacific, and the more amped up this jet turns negatively tilted, the more severe threat that this is going to be playing out by the time we get into your Friday into Saturday time frame. So, but it's going to bring some heavier rains back in the picture out ahead of it in the warm sector. So by the time we get into your 5th and 6th of November, portions of North Texas and East Texas could be looking at some heavier rains by then, into Louisiana and Arkansas, back into Oklahoma, back into Kansas, into Missouri, into Iowa here. And then that renewed troughing comes back into picture beyond that, with another trough coming in through the 5th to the 11th, highlighting those above average rains coming back along the West Coast, entering back into portions of Northern California again. And it's going to be a windy week where that trough really starts to dig in by the time we get into your 5th and 6th time frame. So all these areas that's highlighted in the brown shaded areas, expect some windy, very windy conditions as we get closer into that time frame. But overall, here's your rain going to be falling over the next 7 days with those significant trough that's going to be digging in from the Pacific Northwest. We got plenty of rains entering back in the picture for the coastal regions, dropping into Northern California, lighter amounts into Central and Southern California, but still some decent rains for them. Back into Nevada, into Utah, in the Four Corners regions. But in the midsection of the country where that clash of temperatures are going to be, that's where the heaviest rains are going to be. So some of the areas in red could be picking up multiple inches of rain here, highlighted in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. But as this system moves across further south, it's going to have the moisture from the Gulf to tap into. So could be looking at some heavier totals further south into the southeast. But further north, there's less instability, less juice to tap into, and these systems will start to fade out. So by the time we get into your Ohio Valley regions, locked under that ridge of high pressure, there's really not much precipitation to speak of for the week to come. While we have Lisa down here dumping all the heavier rains in the Caribbean. But there's plenty of snow back behind there. Renewed snows for all the ski resorts out here, back into portions of the Front Range, getting into even Santa Fe, New Mexico, could get in the action. I think Salt Lake City is going to be picking up a couple inches with this snow. And then some of the higher elevations will be picking up easily a foot, if not 2 feet of snow over the course of the next week. So what's beyond that? Here's the overall setup for this week. So man, we got plenty of warm conditions, right? I don't need to tell you, a lot of warm air is going to be trailing across the central and eastern 2/3, while we have successful troughs going to be coming in off the west coast with plenty of cooler air for them. As we go into week 2, that's where it's a little bit more concerning. We're still going to have the higher temperature anomalies for our central and eastern 2/3 of the US, but we also have to look out maybe for that second feature getting a little bit closer to the United States by then, tapping into some of that warmer air, while much of the West is still under that influence by those successful troughs that are going to be coming in with well below average temperatures. And this is your November through the 7th through the November 14th time frame. So overall, here's the precipitation anomalies as far as like above average precipitation, what you would typically see for those first 2 weeks of November. And we find ourselves with above average precipitation for much of the West here with those successful troughs coming in. I do feel you got some decent rains coming back into Texas, but overall the above average precipitation is really going to be highlighted over Oklahoma, through Kansas, over Missouri, Iowa, back into Wisconsin, portions of Illinois, much of the South, and especially further northeast you go, are fairly drier conditions, what you would typically see. But yeah, this is the overall anomalies. This is hinting at some of the longer range by the time we get into that second week of that second potential system that might be coming. So we'll have to be watching this and really fine-tuning as we could potentially have another system. I think we only typically have one named storm in November, but I'm thinking we get at least 2 or 3 to end of more of an average month. So we only have 7% left, but hurricane season did start late this year, and I feel like it is going to end late. And there are definitely signs that at least we have one storm, could potentially 2 storms, maybe even a 3rd storm combined over the course of November. So what's happening going forward, right? I know I get a lot of comments, hey, when's it going to cool down in the east, right? Well, we highlighted this in my rare storm video of this recurving typhoon, setting the stage up in more of the longer term view with the WPO turning negative. And then beyond that, once the WPO turned negative, that would help influence the EPO going negative. And that's exactly what we're seeing getting into the second half of November. So it's going to be, I think, warm, as I showed you, for the first half of November in much of the central and eastern 2/3. But we have the EPO taking a significant dip by the time we get into the 16th, 17th of November. And not only does it go negative, but it remains negative for the rest of November. So it's going to be a complete pattern flip, I feel, beyond the first half into the second half, where much of the East Coast is going to be well below average temperatures. And if we take a look at the central forecasting system, if you were with me in my October outlook, at the beginning of October, we highlighted the significant pattern change on this model, and it highlighted much of the West Coast was above average temperatures by then, but then the atmospheric river was going to come back on the 20th of the month, and that's exactly what played out, and it's continuing to play out with those troughs coming in, with those successful troughs. Now we got all the troughs highlighting over the West Coast, but with that significant dip in the EPO, we're going to see a major pattern change as we get into the second half of November. So by the 17th, in the climate forecasting system, we highlight on the 500 millibar, good troughing is going to be setting up over the Northeast. That's implying that when I talked about the polar vortex starting to get influenced, starting to get elongated again, becomes weak, and as it becomes weak, pushes down through the mid latitudes, and then I think will filter into the east coast with some below average temperatures, with that negative NAO, that blocking over Greenland starting to take shape. And I feel like it's a step down process that we talked about. And as the polar vortex will start to elongate, as the Arctic becomes weaker, it'll set up some of the warmer conditions over the Arctic, and the colder conditions underneath that drops the 540 line, getting it a little bit further south. So this is by Thanksgiving week. Heading into Thanksgiving, we could be looking at some much colder conditions, and maybe even some snow starting to fly in some of these regions further up to the north. And I think that just begins to amplify even further as the step down process will beginning to really take shape as we get into that last week of November, with the ridge locked over the west. All the colder air will be central and eastern 2/3. And then I think the elongation of the polar vortex will be really felt by then, not just into our northern regions, but much further south, dropping those much colder conditions. And I think we'll start to have a much more active week with a lot more snow on the table and much colder conditions as we enter the second half of November, but especially that last week of November. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. I do like this video. Definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Catch the latest update, why I protect you before and after storm.